Today I'd like to talk about routers. We use quite a few of them in the workshop at the guitar making school, and they come in a range of sizes, and we've got quite a few. What might be called a 1/4 inch router or trimmer. These tend to come with a body, with a cylindrical body that'll fit into perhaps a range of different bases. So this one's made by Makita, and the base that I've got loaded up here at the moment is a fixed base. Once the depth is set, you can't plunge it, it's fixed. This base has also got a guide bush. Now I'll talk a bit more about guide bushes, but the guide bush here allows us to follow templates. And guide bushes come in all sorts of different diameters to make different size bits that you might be using. We use this predominantly for doing things like the tail wedge on a guitar, occasionally for routing a strip down the back of the guitar if you want to inlay a decorative strip there, and a few other operations. The same router can be used in what's called a plunge base. So this is pretty much the same machine that I just showed you, the Makita style trimmer. The beauty of this is that the base can be plunged, and that means we can set up, and we can, with adjusting the depth, we can plunge it as we're working. We can stop, adjust the depth, plunge again, and take successively deeper cuts. So that's a pretty useful thing to have. In addition to this Makita trimmer set, we've just recently got the DeWalt version of the same thing, but this one is battery powered. So once again, it comes out, and this is a 1/4 inch. It takes 1/4 inch diameter, bits with a 1/4 inch diameter shank on them. And being battery powered means that we're free of the cord. This is going to be particularly useful when we mount it on something like our circle cutter base. So at the moment we have the same DeWalt machine, but this one is got a cord on it. And so whilst it's a nice long cord, when you're going around and around cutting circles, it can get tangled up, so we've got to go both ways. But the plunge base that this one's mounted on, so this one's currently on a fixed base like the Makita I showed you a minute ago. This one's on a plunge base. It can be plunged up and down while we're using it. DeWalt also do a pretty good job with dust extraction. And we have another DeWalt router in the workshop that can take either a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch shank. It's a bit bigger than this machine, and it comes with either a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch and a bigger plunge base. So that's a pretty useful one to have, and things like the circle cutting base make it pretty useful as well. And then up from that we have not just this one, which is an AEG 1/2 inch router, but we have a couple of Hitachi 1/2 inch routers, which are the really big, powerful machines for doing the heavy duty work. We use these for routing out things like cavities in solid body guitars and other operations where we need a fair bit of power and we're driving big diameter bits. Let me talk about bits for a minute. Bits, like routers, come in all shapes and sizes. And I guess down at the bottom end of the scale we have these little guys. So these have got a 1/8 diameter shank on them. We'll often use them inside one of these 1/4 inch machines, particularly if you're doing things like saddle slots in the bridge, and some other operations where we want to use a small bit, but we want to have the mass, the weight of one of these gives it more stability. It's not liable to vibrate, and we get much smoother cutting when we use one of these combined with one of these small bits. Needless to say, we have to be careful with them. They tend to break very easily. Beyond that, again, we have an awful lot of router bits in the workshop, Starting from the small ones, we have 1/4 inch bits, we have straight cut bits, we have flush trim bits with bearings on them, we have this big guy which is a 3/4 inch diameter. It's got a total of 4 cutters on it, and it's got a bearing at both ends. Can be used for shaping solid body guitar bodies. Pretty dangerous to use anything this size without an awful lot of care. One thing I just want to point out, a lot of bits like this one is what we call a straight cut bit. It's just simply a straight sided cutter. This one happens to be 1/2 inch diameter. No, actually it's not, it's 16mm diameter, 5/8, and it's just straight cut, that's it. And used in a plunge router or in a router table is a useful bit. And they come in all sizes from quite small. Here's a 1/4 inch one that's exactly the same in terms of being just a straight cut bit. There's a 12mm straight cut bit, and somewhere here I'll have a 1/2 inch straight cut bit. There's one there. But then sometimes these bits have bearings on them. This one's got a bearing up on the shaft end, and occasionally you'll see them with a bearing on the other end, the top of the bit. And they're both 1/2 inch, otherwise just 1/2 inch straight cut bits. But these are very useful when you're wanting to, they're called flush trim bits or pattern following bits, and they're actually excellent for when you're using a template to cut a shape that is irregular, particularly things like cavities for electric guitars, and both the cavities in the guitar and also cutting around the shape of the body. And once again, there's a 1/4 inch one. You'll notice this one's got, I don't know whether you can see that, but it's got it's a spiral bit as opposed to a straight cut bit. So spiral bits are pretty handy because they give you a smoother cut, and they're either up cut or down cut. Talk about the detail of that another time. Just a couple of other specialty bits. These 2 yellow ones are good for cutting the radius. One's a 16 inch radius, the other one's a 12 inch radius. So we use these for preliminary shaping of fretboards. In order to use these, we've got to use them in a router table, and I'll come back to router tables a little bit later. Now, the thing about routers is, in my view, possibly the most dangerous tool in the whole workshop. Why? Because they pack a punch. There's an awful lot of energy. Most of these machines run at tens of thousands of RPM. This one here goes from 1,000, this one goes from 1,000 to 3,000, but you'll get these bigger ones over here that'll run up to 20 and 30,000 RPM. And if they bite a piece of wood when you least expect it, or you don't keep them under control, they can wreak all kinds of havoc. So we're very careful with how we use them in the workshop. And there's not enough time to go in the ins and outs of using a router. This is not a router training video. It's simply to explain a little bit about the different kinds of routers we use and some of the terminology. But I want to impress on you that these are dangerous machines, particularly these bigger ones, and they can do an awful lot of damage. So we're always very careful how we use them. We'll always make sure that the router bit is not touching anything, not touching the wood when you turn them on. That is an absolute recipe for disaster if the bit is in contact or could come into contact with a piece of wood before it's up to speed and you're ready to start cutting. The plunge routers, also we're very careful to make sure that the machine is fully retracted and comes to a complete stop before we lift it off the work. Picking up a router while it's still running is one of the most foolish things to do with a router. The bit just has to touch the edge of whatever work you're working on, hit the template, and it'll make a complete mess of it. And of course, there's a good chance that you'll cause injury to yourself or someone else. there have on occasions been times when bits have broken, and when the thing's rotating at some 10,000 plus RPM, it has a tendency to throw those small bits of metal across the room. General rule of thumb, and this applies to every bit, whether it's one of these tiny little ones or whether it's a big one like this one, my general rule of thumb is that unless circumstances require otherwise, we never cut either deeper into the material, so deeper this way, or deeper sideways into the material than half the diameter of the bit. So if this is a 16mm bit, the maximum depth I would ever take is 8, but I would normally in fact go less, maybe 5mm. And I'm never going to take off more wood in a pass along the side of the bit than half the diameter of the bit. So again, 8mm in this case, but I would again be saying, you know, like 5mm isn't too bad. And so when you come down to using a bit that's only 2mm in diameter, same rule applies. We never take more than 1mm depth this way or 1mm depth that way. That's a general rundown on the different routers that we use, the bits that we use in them. I implore you to use them with great care and to ask. These are tools that take a little bit of getting used to, and you know, you need to take them one step at a time.